Hello everyone, this is QG and this will be my Arcane Mage Mythic Plus guide for 10.1.5. Let's first start with the stats. So in Mythic Plus, as Arcane, you want to prioritize Mastery, Crit, Over, Versa, and Haste. Now, I wouldn't necessarily talk about the stats in this priority, as when you are thinking about how you should do your stats, you should think in the following way. You should have about 40% Mastery, because Mastery is your best stat. It scales a lot all of your damage because of certain talents and how it works. So Mastery about 40%. After Mastery, you want to think about Haste. So you want somewhere in between 15 to 20% haste. You don't want less than that because you need a certain amount of haste to be able to do all your spells in your burst window. And you want less than 20 because on double bloodlust in single target situations, Arcane Blast's cast time is going to be faster than the global cooldown. So you're basically haste capped because of that. So 40% mastery, 15 to 20% haste. Then you will want about, it's not really that relevant, but let's say between 5 and 12% Versa. And the rest you want it as crit. So your main stats are still Mastery and Crit. You will have a lot of Crit. You don't want a lot of Versa, you don't want a lot of Haste, but you don't want zero either. The two caps you really want to hit are about the 40% Mastery and then the minimum 15% haste and maximum 20. And outside of that, you should sim your character and see what amounts of Versa and Crit should be good for you. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk to you guys about in this stats section is which file you are going to be running in Mythic Plus. So you generally don't want to run the Corrupting Rage file just because of the debuff. So you would ideally like to run the Tepid Versatility file. You will gain this a similar amount of damage with both, but you know, one is more riskier because you have debuff. So when you think about your stats and the way you are going to do them, when you sim, for example, sim with the file that you are going to be playing. In very high keys, you want to play with a Versa file, not necessarily to have more Versa, but just to not have the debuff. So you will try to build your stats around having more crit, because you will not gain the crit from that file, because you're going to get Versa from that file. So it's okay to have less Versa, so you either go something like 5% Versa and a lot of crit, and then use the Versa file, which I recommend. Or you go around 13% Versa, and you can have up to like 24% crit, which is not that much because you're going to be able to use the crit file. But I don't recommend this for hierarchies. Right, let's talk about talents. So this build right here is the build that I currently run in all Mythic Plus dungeons this season. Let's look at the general tree for a second. So there are a few talents which are mandatory in my opinion, which are the damage ones, right? Pretty obvious. This one increases your critical strike chance. This one increases your haste. You have overflowing energy, which seems pretty obvious to take, as well as Encanter's Flow. This kind of stuff. The rest, you would really pick whatever you prefer. Now, of course, Temporal Warp is also a huge damage increase, so you would like to take that, but the rest is just utility. The reason I'm using this build is we also had Incorporeal, or the Dispel Affix, I don't remember which one is it named that way, but I had to remove Curse on a mouse over macro, but if not, I'm generally playing shorter Alter Time if I can. So, in Mythic Plus, you want a lot of utility, so Dragon's Breath is great. The short Blast Wave is actually great. You can play the big one as well, but a short Blast Wave is basically an AoE interrupt, so it's similar to Dragon's Breath. That way you have 2 AoE stops, which is great. Once you try playing with Ice Flows and you learn how to play properly with it, you're never going to want to go back to Shimmer, because regular blink makes you go out of stuns, out of roots, and then you just never need to blink because you're moving all the time. So I strongly recommend getting used to playing with Ice Flows. I personally find having a very short Ice Block in combination with Ice Cold, sorry, this is cooldown reduction, in combination with the healing of the Ice Block and the Ice Cold talent, this combo is insanely good in my opinion, especially in very high keys, because in very high keys, what makes one of the things that can make you a very good player is rotating between your defensive CDs. So the more defensives you have, the more you can do a good rotation between them. I'm thinking about the mobs in Freehold, you know, who do their shouts like first pull and second pull. Well, on the second pull, there's two of them, so you gotta rotate between return visibility, which gives you 60% damage reduction, and then you use a shield for yourself, and then you use mass shield because it also gives you shield, and then you will use ice block, and then your shield comes back, you know, this kind of stuff. So you can take care of yourself for like 6 or 7 casts easily. Yes, but you could, you know, you could play Ring of Frost, you could pick out Diverted Energy to play shorter Master of Time. This, I don't think this is a very good and popular talent, but I just like its functionality, so I'm picking it. You can pick, you know, Shield on Blink. Everything else is your choice. And of course, pick Shifting Power. I didn't even talk about it because it seems obvious, right, to take. I strongly recommend, by the way, that you read all the talents so that you know what you pick and what you're missing on. This can be a huge help. Now, regarding the main tree, well, the important components to understand for the rotation is Arcane Surge, Touch of the Magi, and Radiant Spark, because we will be aligning these three together. Now, a difference between how Arcane was played before the season and now is before we would take these talents to play with Arcane Harmony. Now we are not playing with it anymore, and we rely on randomness with Orb Barrage, which I kinda dislike, but you'll have your own opinion at the end of the video. Anyways, this is for talents for now. I will come back to talents. Let's talk about trinkets. So Arcane's damage profile is very bursty. You have Arcane Surge, which I've talked about, which is a 1 minute and 30 second cooldown, or 1 minute and 15 if you count in Shifting Powers cooldown reduction. And you basically want to have a big unused trinket to use with that cooldown. So your two best trinkets would be Iridius Fragment. This is your on-use, so you press this with your cooldowns, and Nilthyron's Cold Chaos, or another passive, which just buffs your stats, because you want a lot of stats. You don't want a passive that just does random damage, because you want as much stats as possible in this burst window. So you want a one unused, one passive trinket. These are the best, but you can have any other trinkets. Again, I strongly recommend simming your character and simming trinkets to see which ones are good, but generally the ones which give you stats and the stats that you want. So, you know, Mastery is ideal, an unused with Versa would be great, but it doesn't exist. I mean, Nilthyron's, what is it called? There is a trinket that actually can give you Versa, but I don't remember the name. It's this one, Spells of Nilthyros. You can play Spells of Nilthyros. You can play Elector's Alchemist Stone if you miss on Haste for the passive one. You can play Ominous if you want a passive one. I just strongly recommend have at least one unused. You can also play two unused trinkets, because generally unused trinkets' cooldown are longer, much longer than 1 minute and 15 seconds, so you can just alternate between them, which means every single set of CDs you are going to have a unused to press to do much more damage. But still, one unused and one passive is the best. Let's talk about weak auras. So I'm going to show you my weak auras package for Arcane, which I also have linked in the description below, and which you can also take from my Discord if you join it. The rest of my UI is also available on the rest of my Discord if you are a Twitch sub and you link your Discord account to it. Yes, so let's look at my weak auras. This is the set of weak auras that I have for Arcane and that I find really important. Some are a bit outdated, but most of them you can find on Porom's weak aura page or Phosphoros, because they do amazing weak aura work. So I am not taking credit for most of these weak auras. I know other people are doing them, and you shouldn't give me credit for them. I just assembled a bunch of them together and put them in a certain order. Yes, so the most important ones and notable ones would be on the right side. So I have this is Siphon Storm's buff from Evocation. This is the Arcane Surge buff, and this is Radiant Spark. Since you want to align off your cooldowns, once you pop them off, seeing them can be very good to see how much time you have exactly left, you know, on each of them. I have the clear casting procs here on the right side, so these 3 purple bars will be how many clear casting stacks you have, because the default Blizzard UI does not show you how many clear casting stacks you have, but only that you have clear casting procs, not how many. And on the left side, you have the impetus procs, you have harm melee, but we don't use it anymore. You have another precision. You have this haste talent, which I'm forgetting the name, but I'm going to open it in a second. It's this one, Arcane Tempo. Oh, and you have bursting energy, which is your foresight, to know if you have it procced or not. And you have this big crit weak aura, which is an old weak aura that I used before, which I still keep, which only shows you, quickly pops up when you crit with Arcane Barrage on a touch of the Magi target, basically. So I strongly recommend you using these weak auras, and you are going to see, when I will demonstrate the AOE rotation and single target rotation, why these weak auras matter a lot. So let's get right into it. Let's get into the rotations, and let's start with the most important one, which is the AOE one, because this guide is designed for Mythic Plus. So for the rotation section of this guide, I will actually go over it very fast, because you can find the textbook rotations and priority lists on some links I will link in the description below, which are Cinnabon's guide, Phosphorus's guide, and especially Toe Grinder's guide on the Mage Hub, which is an amazing site that you should always check in every season, because it's really up to date with what's happening. So what you want to do is pop Evocation, and the rotation is as follows: Radiant Spark, Nether Tempest, Arcane Surge, Barrage, and Touch of the Magi while Barrage is in the air, and then you press Barrage. If it procs or Barrage, then you press Barrage again, and if it doesn't proc, you press the Orb. So basically what you want to do is set off as many Arcane Barrages as possible. For that, you need arcane charges, and to generate your arcane charges, they will either be generated automatically by Orb Barrage, or you have to generate them manually, either with Arcane Orb, either with Arcane Explosion. Priority would be, after you do this, CD popping thing, you do barrages. When you don't have stacks, you press an orb. When you don't have orbs in legendary stacks, you press explosions. That's what it is. So I will show you now a demonstration of the rotation. I won't have at least 3 stacks, so I got full stacks now, but I still need to pop Evocation for Siphon Storm, which you can see on the right side, Radiant Spark, Nether Tempest, Arcane Surge, Barrage and Touch of the Magi while Barrage is in the air, Barrage again. As you can see, Orb Barrage is proccing, so I'm pressing Barrage right away, but when it doesn't proc, I'm pressing Orb manually to generate the stacks. And now, since I don't have Orb anymore, I do Arcane Explosions until 4 stacks, and then I Barrage again. And this will be your rotation until Arcane Surge is over, and even afterwards. So in AoE, all scenarios, you want to generate charges and consume them with Arcane Barrage. Then you want to pop Shifting Power as soon as possible to go into the mini burn, which is the mini version of the rotation that I just showed you, which is exactly the same, except you don't use Evocation or Arcane Surge. So you will only use Radiant Spark, Nether Tempest, Barrage and Touch on the Magi while it's in the air, Barrage again, it didn't proc so I press Orb, Barrage, it didn't proc so I press Orb, Barrage, it proc so I press Barrage again. This is it. Now, again, please check the guides that I linked in the description, because there is some things which you could do, like press an extra Arcane Blast depending on if the Arcane Orb procced or not, so you don't mess up your Radiant Spark debuffs or stuff like that. But in the few high Mythic Plus runs that I've done, I found that this is only a small thing which you could do, and it doesn't really impact your gameplay or your performance that much, and it's too much of a trouble to think about, to be honest. An important thing to note is that for your AoE burst rotation and also for your mini burn, you want to have both of your Arcane Orb stacks ready. One charge's cooldown is 20 seconds, so 2 charges is 40 seconds, which means if you don't use any Arcane Orbs outside of your burns, either big or small, you will have guaranteed 2 Arcane Orb charges during those burns. If you have a lot of Orb Barrages procs, then and you don't need to use, Arcane Orb during the burns, then you can use them right after the burns whenever you don't proc or brush. But keep in mind not to use the manual orb charges outside of the burn rotations. Alright, so for the single target rotation, I will actually first talk about our filler rotation, which is very simple to understand, and you will much easily understand how the burst rotation works afterwards. The filler rotation is composed of, again, a priority list of things you need to do, which are in the text guides that I sent in the descriptions below, but there are basically two spells you want to press, right? You want to do Arcane Blasts, and you want to press Arcane Missiles. These are my clear casting procs. On the left side, you should see Nether Precision. Now, when you consume a clear casting proc with Arcane Missiles, you will generate 2 stacks of Nether Precision. So you want to use those 2 stacks because this buffs your Arcane Blast. So you press them there. And this is your highest source of damage. So you want to prioritize Arcane Blasts with Nether Precision. After prioritizing this, you prioritize Arcane Missiles with clear casting because you want to generate the Nether Precision stacks. And if you have no stacks or no procs like I have right now, you just do Arcane Blasts until you get a clear casting proc, like I just did here. So then I stop, I press the clear casting proc, and I instantly go for the Arcane Blasts which are buffed. And I got a clear casting proc again, so I pressed again, and then I press the blasts again. And this is the filler rotation. Now, the beginning of the burst rotation for single target is the same as for AoE. So you will pop Evocation, you will do Arcane Surge, Radiant Spark, Barrage, Touch of the Magi while the barrage is in the air to regenerate the charges, and then instead of doing Arcane Barrages like you do in AoE, you do Arcane Blasts until 4 Radiant Spark debuffs, and you consume the 4th Radiant Spark debuff also with an Arcane Blast. So you do not want to use Barrage again after you've pressed Touch of the Magi. Which means in single target, basically your rotation will be Evocation or Radiant Spark, Nether Tempest, Arcane Surge, Barrage, Touch of the Magi, and then 4 Arcane Blasts, and then the filler rotation. The filler rotation, you will do it during the burst as well, right? Because you finish the other steps of your burst rotation, and you will also do it after Evocation, Siphon Storm's buff ends and Arcane Surge's buff ends. Now, keep in mind, Orb Barrage also works in single target, which means you can launch on Orb when you press the Barrage before Touch of the Magi, but this is after you've pressed Radiant Spark, so this can, fuck up your Radiant Spark's debuffs. So I will demonstrate it as well. Evocation, Radiant Spark, Touch of the Magi, Nether Tempest, Arcane Surge, Barrage and Touch of the Magi, and you see I procced an Orb, so Radiant Spark is at 3 debuffs, so I only do 2 blasts before going into the filler rotation. And now I do, I'm using these buffs, and I'm using clear casting, and then I have Nether Precision again, so I press Nether Precision, and then I have clear casting again, so I press clear casting, and then I press Nether Precision, etc. Until you get to the mini burn, which is exactly the same thing as in AoE. I mean, the difference between big and mini burn in AoE and single target are the same. You do the same rotation, except you don't have Arcane Surge, and you don't Evocation before. So it's Radiant Spark, Nether Tempest, Barrage and Touch of the Magi, and then you do Arcane Blasts until 4 debuffs, you consume the 4th debuff, and then you go into the filler rotation by consuming clear casting procs and using Nether Precision buffed Arcane Blasts. And this will be your single target rotation for all situations in Mythic Plus. Now, I wanted to address a few subjects, right? Because you can find better versions of basic Arcane Mage guides, but I think what I can bring to the table is some insights on how to play Arcane Mage in a more advanced mode. So I will address some questions that I've seen very often and some ideas that I thought, can help you improve your gameplay in high Mythic Plus Arcane gameplay. First of all, I've seen very often the question of, should we play staffs or one hand? I was lucky enough to get the 450 staff, so I'm playing it, but generally it doesn't matter. That's a short answer. The longer explanation is, before Dragonflight, people would prefer playing one hand and offhand rather than staffs, which are two-handed weapons. And that is because you can play more with your stats, right? If you consider a two-hand weapon a one item, well, you know, you're stuck because you only have two secondary stats. Whereas if you have two items or two half items, you can split the secondary stats differently depending on, you know, which items you drop. So the idea would be, imagine I want a certain amount of Versa, Mastery, Crit, and Haste. Well, I can only achieve it if I split my two hand into two different weapons so that I can, you know, achieve my BIS desired stat weights, right? But right now in Dragonflight, you can, you know, craft all your gear. Crafted gear is basically BIS. So since you can play with your gear that much and your stats that much, it doesn't matter if you play two-hand staffs or if you play one-hand and off-hand. What matters is that your stats are correct, and so the priority comes on item level. So if you're lucky to get a 450 item level, either main hand, offhand, or staff, you will prioritize playing that one, and you will change your stats accordingly. For example, this one has a lot of haste, and haste is not one of Arcane's best stats, but I almost don't have haste anywhere else in my whole gear. So I'm adapted all of my gear to this item so I could play this high item level piece of gear. So that settles the debate between staff versus one hand slash offhand. It does matter, eye level is always better. This is also an important Picora, which makes you use Arcane familiar if you forgot. I forgot to tell you about this one. I wanted to speak again about the fact that we don't have a lot of Versa because it's not our main stat as Arcane. Well, this is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that Fire is so good. Not only, you know, it did much more damage. I don't know how it's going to do after the nerfs today, because Fire is getting nerfed today. Dungeons are becoming easier today, so, you know, meta is going to shift maybe or not, I don't know. But Fire was reigning all over the other DPS classes, and of course over the other mage DPS specs as well, which are Frost and Arcane. And one of the reasons for that is that Fire's main stats are Versa and Haste. It's first Haste and then Versa, I know, but all Fire mages will run around 30% Versa, which makes you incredibly tanky in very high Mythic Plus situations. Let me, you know, mention again the freehold shouts of the first mobs in the first and the second pack. Well, if you try to play a 29 as Arcane, you cannot, I'm pretty sure you get one shot even if you have barrier up. So you have to ice block, or you need to invis every single cast, or LOS every single cast. And while it's doable, it's just much easier and much safer if you have a class that just survives it with its basic defensive abilities, which are the mage barrier, right? So as Arcane, we have around 10% Versa, you know, more or less. So with 10% Versa, you really have to pay attention in very high Mythic Plus runs. On your health. We don't have Cauterize, we don't have double ice block like Frost mages do. We had the advantage of using, you know, greater invis compared to the other specs, but it's not even the case anymore because all the other specs are playing it as well. So as Arcane, we need to really be careful about rotating defensive cities properly, because we are much more squishy than a Fire mage, and I think this is a reason why it's much harder to play Arcane in very high keys, because you die much easier. It's notable to talk about as well the fact that the Prismatic Barrier, in my opinion, is the best shield from all mages. So Mass Shield has become a spell, which makes yourself give the mage shield that you're currently spec'd into to all of your allies. So if I'm playing Arcane, all my allies will gain the Prismatic Shield, which is different from the Fire Shield and the Frost Shield. The Fire Shield will deal damage to enemies which melee attack you. The Frost Shield will slow the enemies which damage you with melee abilities, which basically never happens to DPS or healer players, only happens to tank players. And the Prismatic Barrier also gives you 15% damage reduction on magic damage taken abilities. So not only you will shield your party, but also give them a 15% DR, which combined with the shield, you know, is amazing. There is also an extra effect which makes the duration of harmful magic effects against you being reduced by 25%, but you're generally not gonna pre-mass shield a mass CC, so you know that's irrelevant. But keep in mind, this shield is very advantageous. And if you want to do, you know, very high Mythic Plus content, imagine there are 2 consecutive abilities on a boss or something. I don't have an example, but let's just say there are 2 consecutive AoE abilities, so the whole party will take damage, and the healer wants to use his CDs on one, and he wants you to use Mass Barrier on the other. If you're playing Arcane, and if the spells, one is physical and one is magical, talk to your healer so that you use Mass Barrier on the magical one. If, of course, it works well with his CDs as well, because you will have this 15% damage reduction, and it's going to be better. This is a very small subject, but I feel like I've seen a lot of Arcane Mage players who don't know this. Radiant Spark, let's just read it again. So the target takes 10% increased damage from your direct damage spells. What is a direct damage spell? It means everything which is not HOTS. This is what it means. So Dragon's Breath and Blast Wave will contribute to the accumulation of Radiant Spark's debuff, which means if you enter a pack and you are prepared to CD and you want to CD the pack, but you also know that the tank had asked you to press Dragon's Breath 2 seconds into the pool, you'd better wait with your CDs and Dragon's Breath before you do Radiant Spark, because if you do Radiant Spark and do your rotation and you're at the fourth debuff of your Radiant Spark and you press Dragon's Breath because you gotta CC the pack, Dragon's Breath is going to get buffed from that 4th Radiant Spark debuff, and you are not really going to make use of your full Radiant Spark debuff, which can be a very big waste. Another very small subject, but that I've seen a lot of Arcane Mage players not be aware of, is that mirror images makes you generate no aggro. So once you press mirror images, all of your aggro firstly will be reduced by like 99%, and then it will be redirected to your mirror images, which means before CDing, before doing a lot of burst damage, you should press mirror images just so your tank has no aggro issues. So as Arcane, you should never die of aggro because you have this, and if you get aggro afterwards and the images die and whatever, you will invis, right? There is a talent, which is Reduplication, which makes basically your mirror images cooldown to be as long as your burst cooldown, which is Arcane Surge. So if you feel like you really struggle lining them up and you really are struggling with aggro and you're always dying of aggro and you really want to have Arcane mirror images every single time you CD, well, please play this talent, because this way you won't have any single aggro issues. And another point which I want to address is, don't forget that as Arcane we have insane execute thanks to Arcane Bombardment. So Arcane Barrage, which is doing maybe 35% of our damage in a key, is doing 100% extra damage against targets below 35% health. So when you're in a pack and there are 5 mobs and there's one mob which is at 40% and all the other mobs are 32%, well, you want to target the mobs at 32%, do Arcane Barrages on them until the highest target, comes under 35% as well. So you can fully benefit from your Arcane Execute as well. Lastly, I want to give you a bit of a feedback on how you should play Arcane, what you should think about when, aligning your CDs with certain pulls. So the biggest amount of damage that you will ever output is 1 double Bloodlust. So first of all, try to align, of course, all of your trinkets, your pots, everything with your double Bloodlust pulls. Try to be aware of when they are and, line them up with that. Now, even though Arcane is a, burst into conservatory phase, being a filler phase, and then burst again, and then filler, and then burst and filler, we really don't care that much about our CDs anymore. And what I mean by this is we are not going to hold our CDs for too long because they don't impact our damage output that much anymore. Our barrage is so much of our damage potential, and this carries our damage or makes us do no damage, or even on CDs if it doesn't proc, that we rely too much on it, in my opinion, sadly. So you could use a big burn with all your CDs and get no procs, and 30 seconds later you have your mini burn and you proc 10 times in a row, and you do literally twice the damage that you did on your big burn. So basically, imagine you use your CDs and then the pack is about to die and you're like, okay, but mini burn is coming up, it's ready. but the pack will die in like 15 seconds maximum. I'm just gonna hold mini burn for the next pack. Well, no, you just press your mini burn right then and there. You will benefit from the mini burn execute thing of Arcane Bombardment, and you will get your CDs back for the next pack, because we CD every minute and 15 seconds, and we do a mini burn every 30 seconds after that big burn. So our CDs will be, you know, on pool, and then 30 seconds later, and then 45 seconds later, and then 30 seconds after that, etc. Yes, so sadly, if you will try Arcane in Mythic Plus, you will see what I mean. Even without CDs, if you proc this damn talent, you will do an enormous amount of damage, because yeah, we just rely too much on it. And I'm kind of pissed about it. That's why I really wanted to tell you this. Since we rely so much on this talent, I wanted to give you a tip on how to not overcap arcane charges. So I want to draw the attention on two talents that we have in the tree. The two talents that I want to talk about are Concentrated Power first, so clear casting makes your next arcane missiles channel 20% faster, and your Arcane Explosion Echo for 40% damage. And in AoE, this means that if you have a clear casting proc generated by one of the Arcane Explosions, well, when you press Arcane Explosion again, the damage is not going to get amplified by 40%, but you would rather automatically launch an Arcane Explosion, which does 40% of the damage. This means that when you press one Arcane Explosion, two are going to get cast off, so you will generate two Arcane charges instead of one. So what I mean by this is I have an Arcane clear casting proc ready. I will press Arcane Explosion, and you will see that my stacks are going to get increased twice, not once. So I had 4 charges here with only one Arcane Explosion cast, one global, 4 charges. This will demonstrate perfectly my point, because the second talent I was going to talk about is Reverberate, which makes so if Arcane Explosion hits at least 3 targets, it has a 15% chance of generating an extra arcane charge. This means that statistically, 2 consecutive Arcane Explosions will generate, one of them has to generate an extra charge, right? So when you hit more than 3 targets, instead of generating 1 charge, you can generate 2. But if you also have a clear casting proc, like you just saw it earlier, well, your first Arcane Explosion or manual Arcane Explosion can generate 2, and the automatic Arcane Explosion can generate 2 charges as well. So imagine you have 3 Arcane charges, and you have a clear casting proc ready. You understand now that the potential of a clear casting proc Arcane Explosion is 4 Arcane charges generation. So you do not want to go up to 4 charges. You do not want to waste the clear casting proc on Arcane Explosion. You want to press Barrage only with 3 charges. It's not an issue, because right after barraging, you either still have 30% chance of proccing an orb and then going barrage again. But imagine you don't proc an orb. Well, then you will press Arcane Explosion, which has clear casting proc, and then which means you cast 2 Arcane Explosions with 1 global, and statistically casting 2 Arcane Explosions will give you 100% chance of generating 1 extra charge, which is going to make you have 3 charges again. So statistically, if you have 3 charges and you have an Arcane Explosion, if you press it, you will launch 2 Arcane charges, right? Because if you have 3 and 1 global is going to generate another 3, but the maximum is 4, instead of overcapping those 2 charges, you'd rather consume the first 3, regenerate the other 3, and if you don't have another clear casting proc, you can do another Arcane Explosion to generate up to 4. So this is something that really improved my gameplay, because instead of wasting 1 extra global to go to 4 charges, consuming those with barrage, wasting the clear casting proc, which I might not get again, is, you know, matters a lot in very high Mythic Plus situations where you want to maximize your damage as much as possible. And lastly, I want to talk about the weak aura for Arcane Tempo, which is a talent we play. Consuming Arcane charges increases your haste by 2% for 12 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Which means in AoE, whenever I consume charges, I'm getting this 2% haste buff, right? So you can see I have 2 stacks now, my haste on the bottom left you can see increases, 3 stacks, etc. you want to keep this buff up as much as possible, because when I have full, 5 stacks of the buff, I'm almost at 30% haste when I started with 17. And this way you can press, much more buttons. Haste is one of your best stats in AoE, so yeah, just keep that in mind. This week Laura can help you a lot. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments below. I tried to do a more advanced guide and on, some tips that I have for Arcane. I know the format is not similar to the other ones, so I apologize for that, kind of rushed this one because I really wanted to do it, but I hope I still made you guys learn something. And I strongly suggest you guys watch the other guides as well, the one of Phosphoros, the one of Cinnabon, and read Toe Grinder's guide on the Mage Hub. Thank you for watching, and see ya on the next one.